what you're going to notice is that with your permission, or despite any opposition, I made a change in plan for tonight and felt that what we were discussing last week was worthy of continuing along the same lines, going more in depth into where we left off because of comments and questions that were raised. One idea, and this is why I spend so much time on the text from the Tanakh. One idea, says Rabbi Francis Nataf, an educator, a Jerusalemite, one idea propounded by the Mussar movement of the 19th century is the elusiveness as well as the centrality of self-knowledge. I'm going to repeat that. The elusiveness, we don't always do it, as well as the centrality of self-knowledge. Because our lack of objectivity with regard to ourselves is a major obstacle to self-knowledge. It is often easier to learn about ourselves by observing the character and behavior of others. And that's what we are doing when we read the narratives that we read. I am sure you will agree. And certainly by us being willing to look at other characters and their behaviors and seeing ourselves through them, that is a first step toward repairing our ills. And by the end of this evening, our time, I will make a claim for something specific that I truly believe is at the bottom, at the heart of the healing process as Jews. The narratives in this eternally relevant classic confirm that life and people, every single person, is complex. Choices must be made, and often they are difficult. And values prioritized. And not one good value as opposed to a bad value, we've said this many a time, but two legitimate and positive values. Sometimes, and that's what makes it difficult, we have to choose between both good values. And this led us to last week. Last week, it was reaction to the prior weeks, almost, I'd say, hippie-like aspiration for harmonious conflict resolution. And I told you last week that I even heard from some of you saying that you are a lot more pessimistic about harmony, et cetera, et cetera. So last week, we presented more realistic and pragmatic strategies for conflict resolution. For those of you who were not here, I'm not sure why, we looked at biblical episodes that demanded choices, decisions, and actions more than words, just to sum it up very concisely. And one narrative in particular captivated many of us, and that was the relationship between Jacob, and Esau. So with your permission, we're going to continue leading to a theory that I think is significant. Now, as we read 2a and 2b, please note what is the difference between these two texts. 2a. And Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and slew him. And the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And note, the word here is ach. Now, we're all familiar with that. We're also familiar with this, but look at it very carefully. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, making merry. Mitzachek. And Sarah said to Abraham, "Drive out this handmaid and her son, for the son of this handmaid shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac." But the matter greatly displeased Abraham concerning his son. And God said to Abraham, "Be not displeased concerning the lad and concerning your handmaid. Whatever Sarah tells you, hearken to her voice, for in Isaac will be called your seed." Now, can anybody give me a quick initial difference? Aside from the fact that the characters are different. Anything else that you can think of without me going a little further?
In the first one, God
Yes,
is not heard from until after the deed is done. And it's a deed done directly between two people. In the second one with Sarah and Abraham, God intervenes to tell Abraham to do whatever Sarah has asked him to do. And Sarah is not willing to do it herself. She has to have an accomplice.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, that certainly is a difference. And interesting that you added that she's not willing to do it herself. Is there a reason behind that, Marlene? You sounded almost, what would be the word? You're upset with Sarah, as many people are, for this act.
Well, first of all, I think her reaction to it, again, we come back to the whole area of communication.
Okay, go ahead.
And she's not willing to communicate with Hagar that she's displeased, but she sort of goes behind her back and she's, you know what, she's being sneaky. And I wouldn't be too pleased with her.
Okay, anybody want to respond to that?
I think Sarah doesn't have the authority the way Abraham does. And so Abraham is in control and he can do it. She can't throw her out.
Did you hear that, Marlene?
I heard it, but I think she could.
Okay, all right. Interesting. I wasn't even thinking of that, to be totally honest. In the first case, even though what you just said is absolutely correct, and depending on what the point of me bringing these would be, I could have brought that in. So in the first, we have a conflict, and we know that Cain is upset that God didn't accept his gift, and that he solves the problem with violence. There's a dispute there, and it's solved with violence. That's very different, commentators will tell us, than what happens here. Given what you just said, and that we're critical, and people are sometimes as upset with Sarah and Abraham for kicking them out as the Akedah, but putting that aside, actually, I'm going to say that I don't think we can put that aside. What do I mean? What do I mean? Avram and Sarah, look at where it says the matter greatly displeased Abraham. That's pretty ambiguous. What could have displeased him? It says concerning his son. There are two ways that we can take that. Rashi suggests both ways, looking below. Abraham's distress was because Ishmael had become a bad influence and rejected Abraham's values. That could be one thing that distressed him. On the other hand, the same Rashi says, Abraham grieved at the prospect of sending Ishmael away. Can we agree that those are both valid possibilities? I think so. That's why life is complicated. It might break your heart either way, but you're going to have to make a choice. Now, Rabbi David Wolkenfeld, a rabbi in the States, says, but Abraham's reluctance to listen to Sarah is the first time the Torah presents us with a profound truth standing in opposition to another profound truth. Meaning, what happened with Cain and Abel, it wasn't that they were both right. Cain did something, even if he didn't know what death and killing was all about, it was wrong. Here is the first instance where we have a machloket, a debate where both parties have legitimate truths. Now, what's the difference between these truths? Anybody? Avram has one and Sarah has one. So let me say Avram's first, and then see if you can then come up with Sarah's. Avram has been told that it is through him that the world, the entire human family is going to be blessed. And he is concerned about that as his overriding project. And we have examples of that from the start. We always use this example of how hospitable he was even when he was in pain. That in the heat of the day, it says, when he had just, as an older person, had his bris, he's still standing at the entrance to his tent, welcoming visitors, and not necessarily Jews, even though he's just had his brit. So he is associated with chesed, acts of kindness for all of humanity, even though we say he is the father of Judaism. What now, in contrast, could we suggest was Sarah's immediate project, her specific project?
Her son. She was really only concerned about Isaac, her son.
Oh, in what sense, Bev? And for what purpose? Was she just anti-Ishmael as
No,
just a kid who was bothering her son, or
No,
go on?
she felt that he was a bad influence on whatever he was doing. That, when you feel that somebody is not behaving acceptably, that they're not sharing your values, then you don't want, again, you're supposed to choose a good neighbor and, somebody who's sharing your values. And it didn't seem to her that Ishmael shared those values that she wanted Isaac to have.
Okay, thank you.
Bracha,
Go ahead.
I'm having a problem with this with Ishmael, because nowhere are we hearing that he was a bad influence. We're just supposing from the text. In other words, the Midrash has been written just the same way as Esav was accused of being a bad influence. Ishmael is being a bad influence. It may be, in putting it in modern terms, the fact that he was not, and I'm using this in quotations because it's not a word that I would use. In the fact that he's not a purebred is bothersome. Why should he, who is the child of an Egyptian and Abraham, be permitted to carry on Abraham's name, as opposed to Isaac, who is a purebred person? And I really see some discrimination going on here.
Yeah, but think about it. It was Sarah's idea. And she knew when she suggested that Avram take Hagar, that was a possibility.
I understand that, but now that she has a son of her own, she has put Ishmael in a different category, and he's not as welcome in her household as he was in the first place.
Okay,
Hagar served a purpose for
yes.
Sarah, because she was infertile and she couldn't have a child. But once she had a child, the whole dynamic shifted, and she's feeling a lot of, I think, petty anger at Hagar's behavior. It doesn't say that Ishmael was misbehaving. It says that Hagar was doing something that Sarah didn't like.
I'm just thinking, though, if Sarah is doing something that, if Hagar is doing something Sarah dislikes, then Ishmael is going to be influenced by his mother's attitude towards Sarah. And it could be that it goes further, that, because Hagar is sort of lording it over her that she had the son, that there may be a sense of superiority in Ishmael toward Sarah, as well as toward Isaac.
I think what you're both saying is definitely possible. On the other hand, I am willing to abide by something that we know about the text, that it doesn't always say a lot. And then just through a few words that we can have a sense that Sarah, and if God is going along with it, has a right to feel that Ishmael is going to be a bad influence. But behind that all is, and that's why I pushed Bev to explain, is that Sarah understood that for Avram to be able to fulfill the mission of Lech Lecha and ethical monotheism, it needed to begin with a particular family that could model that. I am willing to give that to Sarah, that she saw that as her specific project for the right reasons. I'm just throwing that out. Maybe yes, maybe no. Stephen.
Although we are studying this text, I have a comment to make about that. You originally previously said objectivity is very crucial. So how come in this type of discussion, I've never heard one lecturer, teacher of mine, discuss the perspective from the Arab, not the Muslim, the Arab point of view about this encounter and what took place. We take our one-sided approach, which of course I believe at the end is the valid approach and the desirable approach, but I'm doing it in a vacuum, in a void, without hearing even the commentators from the Arab position of this
Okay.
story.
Stephen? I'm sure there are many other classes that you could attend. I'm saying that jokingly. However, that could obviously be a topic for a class. That isn't our topic. I'm bringing these two examples because I'm still looking to delve into the complexity of relationships, and particularly our concern is why and how did God choose, ultimately, when we get down to Jacob and Esau, how did he choose between those two brothers? And because we said last week, some suggested, you know, Marlene says that line often, I'm having a problem with, and I'm glad you do that most of the time, but she was bothered by how most look at Esau. And that's why I want to get back, wanted to continue with this. Another time, that's an extremely important topic, how they look at this whole subject. Absolutely. And when we're interested in talking about Jew and non-Jew, then of course, that would be part of the subject matter, Stephen. I thank you for always raising your questions. Let's continue. And I don't have to convince you that that's what makes this so complicated, because we're not sure. And that's what interpretation is all about. Maybe Sarah, yes, maybe Sarah, no. But what this does, and by you speaking, allows us to think of something that I didn't think of, that you didn't think of. And here we have two people who I think normally like each other. We have Simone and Marlene disagreeing with each other, right? That's what it's all about. But you're open to hearing another's opinion, as long as it isn't something that's hurtful, harmful. Okay. Now, we're getting more toward Jacob and Esau along the way. Before we continue, the next couple, could you describe for me, because you know enough about them, in a few words, Yitzhak and Rivka's relationship, based on what you know goes on between them, Isaac and Rivka's relationship. What would you say? How would you describe that? And there's a reason I want you to say this. What goes on there with the blessings?
Oh, she was deceitful.
I'm sorry? I think somebody just said something.
Anyway, in their relationship, there's a lot of deception.
Ah, yes. Now, what do you think that means about their relationship? She overhears him talking, she cheats, not only deceives her husband, deceives her other son. So what kind of a relationship is that?
Lack of trust and lack of respect.
Lack of trust, lack of respect. Does everybody agree with that?
I think the relationship changed. I think that when they were first together, it was a very loving relationship. I mean, when you hear the story of Isaac first seeing Rebecca in the field when Eliezer brings her back, and he prays, and then there's the whole story of him praying for her because she's infertile. So there was communication, but I think as they got older and Isaac was I think he was very placid. Of the three patriarchs, he's always known to be more placid and non-communicative. And I think
Yes.
as they got older, the communications between the two of them just lapsed and they weren't talking to each other anymore.
Okay, thank you. As Marlene just said, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebecca, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, of Padan Aram, the sister of Lavan, the Aramean, to himself for a wife. Now, it's very interesting. Some commentators point out, look how much information, relationships they mention regarding Rebecca as a sign of that she is a people person, as opposed to Isaac, who is very often in a disconnect. And what would that be attributed to? Because of his experience with his father and almost being sacrificed. However, look what Isaac does that Avram never did for Sarah when she also wasn't conceiving. And Isaac prayed to the Lord opposite his wife. Now, opposite means just, it's a bad translation. In the Hebrew, it says, linochach ishto, which means in her presence. Because she was barren, and the Lord accepted his prayer, and Rebecca, his wife, conceived. Commentators take that instant of Isaac praying for her as a very selfless, and because he loved her, he was there, not praying for himself to have a child, but feeling her pain, feeling her pain. And again, you can't say necessarily, you want to suggest that as things evolve, maybe there was less communication, or is it another example of, in this case, Rebecca having her profound truth throughout everything that I haven't brought here, the other psukim after she gives birth or while she's pregnant, her having a sense that it is Jacob that is the one who is meant to carry on the Abraham accords of those times. He is the one who's going to do that. Then, like Sarah, she has her particular specific project. And just as if you have a child who is an artist and you have a child who likes to play with engines, you're going to give that Rembrandt to the artist. You're going to choose the one who is appropriate. And that is what Rivka is doing. Now, complicated, and maybe, as we said last week, maybe things go on that aren't ideal. But when you are dealing with important issues, these are our ancestors, and they're the founders of our people. And they have in their mind and in their hearts, and this is the women. It's the rabbis in the Talmud that put us down, I believe, but let's not go there. Stephen, don't go there. That it's,
The matriarchs.
yeah. So I think the Tanakh actually makes it quite clear how important the women are. So we proceed from here. And now let's take more of a look at Jacob and Esau and why God chose ultimately Jacob. So the first that I'd like us to read is that ladder we're all familiar with. A beautiful, interesting image. Please mute yourself. Somebody, please. And Jacob left Beersheba and he went to Haran. And he arrived at the place and lodged there because the sun had set. And he took some of the stones of the place and placed them at his head. And he laid down in that place. And he dreamed.
Can you leave the car there? We'll finish in a few minutes. We emptied out about 4 boxes.
And behold, a ladder set up on the ground, and its top reached to heaven. So I want you to picture that. The bottom of the ladder is touching.
Because Cindy didn't need much.
She had breakfast. She doesn't want a bagel now.
Do you people hear what I'm hearing?
Yes. Yeah.
Please,
Can you not mute everybody? Do you have a button to mute everyone there?
Just mute everybody.
Mute everybody. That's
Mute
it.
everybody.
I don't have that. I'm gonna have to get Doris to show me how to do that. Okay. So this ladder is in the ground, rising toward lofty heavens. And behold, angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. And behold, the Lord was standing over him, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land upon which you are lying, to you I will give it, and to your seed. And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall gain strength westward and eastward and northward and southward. And through you shall be blessed all the families of the earth, and through your seed. And behold, I am with you, and I will guard you wherever you go, and I will restore you to this land, for I will not forsake you until I have done what I have spoken concerning you. And Jacob awakened from his sleep, and he said, indeed, the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was frightened, and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob arose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had placed at his head, and he set it up as a monument, and he poured oil on top of it. And he named the place Bet El, but Luz was originally the name of the city. And Jacob uttered a vow, saying, now pay close attention, if God will be with me, and he will guard me on this way upon which I am going, and he will give me bread to eat and a garment to wear, and if I return in peace to my father's house, and the Lord will be my God, then this stone, which I have placed as a monument, shall be a house of God, and everything that you give me, I will surely tithe to you. Now, how do we see that Yaakov is still the old Yaakov that we knew? What is he still doing here? Toward the end, God is telling him, I'm making a covenant with you. And what is Jacob doing? He's still scheming. And he's saying to God, you got to give me 4 things. Protect me, make sure I get back. And if you do these things, then I will be loyal to you. Now, what's important about that? Yaakov is on a ladder, and he's always going to be on that ladder. And that ladder is something you and I and everyone is on. the ups and the downs, and we never quite reach Shemaima, the heavens. But we're on it. We're on it. And furthermore, he, Yaakov, still has to be educated. And God knows this. God knows this. Nobody is perfect. And you've got to pick, I'll say it even negatively, the lesser of the two evils. But what does Yaakov have that Esav doesn't? We'll see. Let's continue. The transition that Yaakov makes with his name change. And we are the children of Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael. And Jacob was left alone, right? Now, as he's about to see Esau. And a man wrestled with him, even a more mysterious image, until the break of dawn. And that's what Yisrael means. Yisra, wrestling with El, with God. When he saw that he could not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip became dislocated as he wrestled with him. And he, the angel, said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you have blessed me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have commanding power with an angel of God with men, and you have prevailed." And Jacob asked and said, "Now tell me your name." And he said, "Why is it that you ask for my name?" And he blessed him there. Now, what is the difference between Jacob and Israel? How has he evolved? When we first meet Jacob, he's called Tam, simple. We have this image of him studying and only being concerned about religiosity, spirituality, and avoiding contact and sitting in his tent. And because he only thought about religion and continuing the Abraham project, he felt that he was the one that was more appropriate for maintaining that project than his brother. And his brother didn't see beyond immediate gratification. He was willing to give up that birthright. He did not have that commitment, Esau, to continuity. It's not that Esau was evil. No, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with being a hunter. And in fact, he showed dedication to his father in preparing the meals that his father asked for. So it doesn't mean that we say at that point that Esau was evil. Things might have developed later on that gives us that image of his descendants. But he wasn't interested in that, like his mother and his grandmother, and I believe his father and grandfather. As Yaakov becomes Yisrael, he now does confront directly. And that's the sense we have from him standing up ultimately to Lavan, and now in his fighting the angel, and he has tenacity, and he's even strong enough to demand a blessing. The political scientist, Professor Daniel Elazar, Zichrono Livracha, suggests that God had to make a choice between two flawed individuals, Yaakov and Esau. He had to decide which one was better suited to assume the mantle of Abraham. You know, Esau, the same letters that spell his name, Ayin, Shin, Vav, are the same letters from the word Asui. What is Asui from Oseh? Asui means made. And there's, I think, a wonderful thought about that. Esau considered himself fully made. He was not concerned about the past. He wasn't concerned about the future. He was concerned about that moment. And he was not on the ladder that his brother was. Elazar says, in essence, what we have here is the climax of a struggle between natural man, Esau, and covenantal man, Jacob. Both are presented realistically, warts and all, in the Bible's way. Thus, it is not a confrontation between good and evil, but a choice between two limited and flawed human beings. Esau has the good and bad qualities of natural man, principal among them generosity and impulsiveness, the characteristics of natural liberty. Jacob's character is at least equally mixed, joining intelligence with guile. Once again, God's choices are limited by the realities of human frailty. He makes the best choice that he can, but we need not exaggerate the goodness of one or the badness of the other. I think that's brilliant. We're not going to get anywhere by just looking at the other in his negativity. As his blessing, Jacob's name is changed to Yisrael. Unlike the firm faith of Abraham and the accepting faith of Isaac, Marlene used the word placid before, he is known that he stuck with and just did. Jacob wrestles with God all his life, doing his will only after that wrestling. And we all follow that. This becomes his people's destiny until the end of days. Thus, it is the unique destiny of the Jews, Israel, to wrestle with God as well as be witness to his covenant. Israel's future is not one of blind faith and obedience to God's will, but one of difficult covenant partnership, of wrestling with their own inclinations and doubts in the face of a mystery which will not fully reveal itself. Covenants do not necessarily end strife. They contain it within a framework, or better, within certain bonds. In that sense, the imagery of the conflict between Jacob and the stranger is paradigmatic. The Jews are still holding the mystery in their arms and will not let go without a blessing, while it grasps the hollow of their thighs. And just to add to that, to continue that thought, Rav Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, speaks to Yaakov's growth. And maybe you can say, I'm already anticipating, well, couldn't Asa have grown? Maybe, but you needed somebody at that moment and couldn't wait. Doesn't mean you're giving up. I had to throw that in. But the Jacob we see in these chapters is not the figure whom ultimately we are called on to emulate. We can see why. Jacob wins his battles with Esau and Lavan, but only at the cost of eventually having to flee in fear of his life. Quick-wittedness is only a temporary solution. It is only later, after his wrestling match with the angel, that he receives a new name. That is a new identity as Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome. As Israel, he is unafraid to contend with people face to face. He no longer needs to outwit them by lying or by clever, but ultimately futile stratagems. His children will eventually become the people whose dignity lies in the unbreakable covenant they make with God. Now, I believe that everybody does have her or his own role to play. And one isn't necessarily more important than the other, but one is needed at a specific time. But what becomes clear in Eleazar, especially, is that if we have any chance of healing the ills of people not getting along, it has to begin with, firstly, being self-aware. And I believe that that's what Sarah and Rivka were, realizing who was and what was meant to happen. Secondly, believing that our tradition realizes that life is complicated and how important the word Shema is, that we are meant to have machlokot, differences, because we can only gain from them. Now, I'm not talking about disputes, again, that are harmful. So what this means is that, just as it's been suggested here, that we don't have to look at Esau at that point in his life as negatively, that we have to be open to listening to other views, not if they are violent and not if they are looking to do us in. Let's be clear. There are enough issues that we can share and talk about and listen and say, we're still on a ladder. And we don't necessarily have the profound truth. But let's see what we can do with our profound truths. I want to close with how I began. The word achi. Does anybody remember from last week what Yaakov, at least twice, called Esau when they reunited?
Master.
Adoni, yes. And we thought he's being particularly respectful, and we're not sure who was sincere. Were they being strategic? What did he not call him? And I'm ending with perhaps showing a weakness of Yaakov at that point. You know, the word achi, ach, is used at least 700 times in our Tanakh.
Brother.
Even Cain uses the word ach.
Brother.
Yosef uses the word ach. Shimon, Aharon. Maybe things would have been different if Yaakov was willing to call his brother, achi.
Right.
Because you'll get more out of that relationship than
Master.
somebody who feels servant to master,
Makes sense.
perhaps. As we began, I believe I saw after a few minutes that Rita Karp joined. Rita, I want to thank you for sponsoring this session and last week's. Yes, I see you now. Okay. You should be well. And I look forward, Marlene, to next week you also saying you have a problem with something. Okay.
That's because if I read it too closely, I have a problem.
May you be the student that you are for a long, long time. Okay, and as I said, I hope it rains on Shabbat as it's promising. I know that sounds strange to you, but it's enough of the heat. It's enough of the heat.
We got lots of rain here.
So I hear, so I
Send it
hear.
over.
No. Yeah, it's raining.
I'm going to close because I'm seeing now my sister in the picture. I might have mentioned this a while ago. I've been on a list for Chayalim Bodedim, lone soldiers that are in Israel serving and their families live outside of Israel. And so about 2 minutes from me is a woman who has organized this project of cooking, having volunteers cook, bake a couple of times a month for soldiers when they come into town, spend a Shabbat, they're getting married, Sheva Brachot, all kinds, celebrating something. So it's just a little something. And so I've been doing it. My 19-year-old niece, Hila, heard about it, and she is on the list. And she brought me cookies to bring to them today. And I brought all 30 cookies that she had made. It was very tempting. But when I delivered them today, the woman, Carol is her name, she said, she saw I put Hila's name on the cookies. She said, who is this Hila Twito? And I proudly said, it's my 19-year-old niece who's in Sherut Leumi National Service, and she wants to do it. And she said, that's terrific. So pass that on to your daughter who's probably sleeping because she's on a bus at 6 a.m. to go to Tel Aviv. Be well. Good being with you as always. And I'll see you
Next week.
December 1st. December 1st. Okay. Be
Okay.
well. Take care.
Bracha.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Yehoah.
Thanks,
Thank
Bracha.
Thank you. Have a
Nice to
great
see you.
week.
Thank you. So
Got a
Bye.
holiday next week.
I'll sing in the rain.
Happy Hanukkah.
Oh, that's right.
Happy Hanukkah.
Hanukkah Sameach. Hanukkah
Happy
Sameach.
Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You too.
Okay. Bye.
Night, everybody.